Hi everyone, it's Ardith. Thanks for dropping by. Today is release day at Hutson. We haven't had one of those in a while, but man, this one was worth waiting for. We have a huge release filled with lots of new goodies to play with. I think my favorites are these new Essential Shapes dies. There are circles, squares, rectangles, and ovals, and each one has the basic shape with a narrow frame around it. These are going to be a staple in any craft room. You can use the solid shapes, you can use just the frames, or you can use them together. Today I'm going to explore a way of using the square dies with the frames to create a pattern and to create a whole set of coordinating cards. So here's a look at what you get with the square dies. There are 15 dies in total, and they come on 2 magnet sheets. The shapes nest, and each one has a very narrow frame around the outside. Today I'm going to cut 7 of them at once to create a whole series of frames that I can inlay back together to create a pattern. I spent a bit of time lining them all up to try to get them as evenly spaced as I could, and then I held them together with purple tape and I ran them through my Gemini Junior machine. That center square stuck to the purple tape, but the rest of it popped out very easily, and I'm going to keep that together in one area while I cut 3 more from cream cardstock and 1 from gold mirror cardstock. I'm keeping each pile separate so that I know where they all are for when I lay them back together. So here I have all my frames organized. The next thing I'm going to do is color with Copic markers. I'm only going to color the outline frames, and I know everything looks like a frame right now because of the way I die cut them, but you can tell which ones are frames and which ones are really part of the solid square. Those are quite a bit thicker than the narrow frames. I've chosen a pretty palette of warm colors in blues, greens, yellows, with pops of pink and orange. And here's where I made my mistake. I took a square piece of cardstock that was 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches because I know that's the size of a card. But I should have started with an 8.5 by 8.5 inch square. You'll see how I fix this mistake a bit later. I marked the center of the square so I would know where to start my inlaying. My next step is to coat the whole front of this card with adhesive, and then I just start inlaying all the die cuts. These frames are really narrow, and that makes them really wobbly. So at first it's a little tricky to make sure that you get everything lined up exactly right. But it's really important to get this first placement right, because it will set the stage for all the rest of the inlaid die cuts. I did spend quite a bit of time lining them all up and making sure they were straight. And I use that gold mirror cardstock every once in a while just to add a bit of shine and interest. Now, I'm not going to lie, creating this panel took some time. The coloring took time, the inlaying took time, but in the end, I have a set of 4 cards that I absolutely love, so it was definitely worth it. As I continued to lay in the next layers, this is when it became apparent to me that I should have started with a bigger piece of cardstock underneath to make a full pattern, but again, I'll show you how I'm going to fix that in a minute. It's important to take your time here and make sure that all of the sides of the frames are completely lined up. One of the nice things about using a tape runner here is that initially it's very forgiving and you can easily lift up the pieces if you need to and lay them back down again. I'm using my fingers to kind of push each frame piece up against the one that was put down previously and make sure there's no gaps. I just continued working around, inserting gold frames every once in a while to add some shine. You can see that the color placement is completely random, and by leaving the inside pieces cream, it still has a nice light effect, and it's not getting too dark. I'll skip ahead, and here I'm just finally finishing up those very last bits of the inlaying. I've got a nice mix of color. So here's how I fixed my mistake. First, I gave it a quick burnish on the back to make sure that everything was really stuck down. And then I extended the panel by cutting some triangles and just coating them with adhesive. By doing this, I extended that 5.5 inch square to cover the whole back of my inlaid panel, so I can use every single bit of this to make some cards. As I say, it would have been easier if I just started with a bigger square, but I'll know that for next time. You do want to make sure to have a lot of glue on these backing panels because you want all these little strips stuck down. You don't want them lifting up. I just feel so good when I see this. I am in love with this look, and that means I want to get as many cards as I can out of this panel. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is trim those triangles off so that I'm back to my 5.5-inch square that I can use for my card front. And I'll have those 4 triangles that I can play around with to figure out what else I want to do with them. As I glue them down, I notice that the white triangles behind the stripes are not perfectly cut, so I'll have to do some trimming and just straightening out to make them work. But back to my main panel. I'm going to use one of the Essential Rectangles dies just to give me an idea of where I want to cut my rectangle from. I'm not going to try and cut this with that die because it's 2 layers of cardstock and it's easier just to trim it with my paper trimmer. If I'd used computer paper as my backing sheet, I would have been able to die cut it. For my sentiment, I'm using a little stitched rectangle die that comes in the 2-in-1 box set. I've cut it from cream cardstock and I've also cut it from that same gold mirror cardstock. I'm using a thanks sentiment from the Succulent Sentiments stamp set. I love this handwritten look. Now I want to use the gold piece to create a bit of a frame for my sentiment, and honestly I could have just used one of the small framed rectangle dies, but I didn't think of it at the time. So I just snipped the gold rectangle in half and I added it to the cream rectangle, just peeking out on either side so that it helps draw more attention to the sentiment in the center of that big card. I cut a piece of foam tape so I could pop it up on the panel, and then I added the panel to a cream card base, and that's my first card done. Did I mention how much I love this? It's geometric, but it's still pretty and colorful, and it just makes me happy. For my next card, I put the 4 triangles together, and this time I cut a smaller 4x4-inch panel from it. It's similar to my first card, but just a bit smaller. For my sentiment, I used the happy birthday from the Succulent Sentiments and the longer stitched rectangle from that 2-in-1 box die set, and I popped that up. For my third card, I used a strip of the striped panel and I used one of the Essential Rectangle dies. I cut a cream panel and also a gold frame from it. I created a gold border on the right side by cutting just the very edge of the outside of that same rectangle die from the gold cardstock. For my sentiment, I used the It's All Good set and the tag die from the 2-in-1 box, and I added just a bit of gold to the one end of the tag. For my final card, again I went with a 4.25-inch square, and I taped a narrow border of the striped panel at the bottom. Then I popped up a cream panel over top so that the stripes are just peeking out underneath. I used the Hey There sentiment from It's All Good, and I used one of my leftover gold frames from the Essential Squares from my first card. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really love this design, and I think it's such an easy but fun and unexpected way to use these dies. These cards are part of our release blog hop, so be sure to check out the details on my blog, which I've linked below. Product links are also below and also on my blog. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.